Today we're going to go over some useful tips that might help you as you face Hurricane Dorian. I'm Ethan, and you're watching Radiant Reptilia. So, Dorian is a thing. It's a giant hurricane that's headed towards the East Coast, and it's going to probably wreak a lot of havoc and do a lot of damage to states like North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. If you're a reptile keeper and you have a bunch of reptiles at home, you may be wondering, what are some things I can do to prepare? What do I do if I need to evacuate? How is my animal going to respond to all this, all these changes and everything? So if you're in any of the states I mentioned above, or you're just curious what to do in the case of a hurricane or natural disaster, here are some things that I would consider doing to make sure your reptiles are safe and cared for. So this is a ball python. If you've ever worked with ball pythons before, you'll know that even though they're one of the most commonly kept species of reptile on the market, there's still a lot that goes into their care and husbandry. There's humidity and temperature and food, habitats, hides. All this is important to make sure that your ball python is happy and thriving. But arguably, the three most important things when it comes to keeping your ball python alive and surviving are temperatures, water, and food. This is why large breeders and vendors, like Brian Barczyk, for example, can keep thousands of snakes in a single facility by just giving each snake a water bowl and food and making sure they're warm enough. In other words, Brian Barczyk is doing the bare minimum you would want to do in case of a natural disaster. But his snakes are alive, and when it comes to natural disasters like Dorian, this is ultimately your priority as well. Just like many other keepers, I order my rodents and my insects online in bulk amounts, but shipping is probably going to be down, especially in many of the affected areas. So this is not necessarily something you're going to be able to rely on during the hurricane, and there's even a chance that some of your local stores and pet stores might be closed. So it's a really good idea to stock up as much as you can on food right now before the hurricane actually hits. It's obviously a bit late to order anything online right now, but you still can go to the pet store and get some of their frozen rodents and insects, and go to the grocery store and get all the greens and vegetables that you might need for your various species, whether that be a ball python, a bearded dragon, or a tortoise. Water is a fairly easy one. I'm sure you guys all have water in your house right now, and I'm sure you guys are going to stock up if you're worried that your well or whatever it is going to stop actually delivering water to your house. So when you're stocking up on water, just make sure that you add in some extras to care for your reptile, however that may be. Keep in mind, if you're on really bad city water, you should probably be using ReptiSafe, so just make sure you have enough of that to get you through the time of the hurricane as well. Lastly, we have temperatures. We're really lucky right now that Dorian is hitting in the warmer months. So if your local temperature is anything like mine, you don't need to necessarily worry about freezing temperatures or temperatures getting really low if we do happen to lose power. But it is still a good idea to be prepared. It might be worth stocking up on some actual 48-hour heat packs or something you can do to actually add warmth to your animal. But for now, in this weather, really insulation will probably get the job done. So all the stuff I just said kind of pertains to people who are going to be stuck in their home and who might have difficulties there, like power outages or lack of water or any of those sorts of things. However, if you are actually right on the coast or even closer to the coast, you might have a much bigger issue on your hands. You might actually have to evacuate and potentially bring your reptiles with you. Now in a fantasy land, you would just be able to take your complete reptile enclosures, shove them in the back of your Toyota Sienna minivan, and hit the road. But if you're like me, you might have so many animals and enclosures that they're not all going to fit in your vehicles with you as you go, or you could even come from a large family and then you have a lot of people that are going to take up a lot of space, and obviously the people take priority over the animals to some extent at least. So bringing all of your enclosures with you might not necessarily be an option. So how do you decide what to do? So if you do need to evacuate and take your animals with you, you can do what I like to call the Brian method. Not named after Brian Barczyk, it's actually another Brian that I know. We're going to take a tub that is large enough for your animal to fit inside of. We're going to go ahead and throw in just some very minimal paper towel. Again, this isn't really going to cover all of your ball python's long-term needs. This is just paper towel. It's not going to cover namely the humidity need that your ball python needs to shed properly. But in a time of crisis, we really are just looking for the bare minimal care just to keep your animal happy and healthy for as long as it needs to be away from its actual home. After we got the paper towel, we go ahead and throw in a water bowl, and then we can go ahead and put our animals in it, throw a lid on top of the tub, and we're basically good to go. Now, I know this is a very small tub for such a large animal, but if the space you have available to you is actually really restrictive and you're living maybe with your family or something of that sort, you might not have that much space, so it actually might be necessary to condense your animals to something this small, at least temporarily, just so you can take them all with you to safety. If the risk is actually big enough to be evacuating, I think it's much better to put your animals in subpar conditions for a temporary amount of time than leave them in their actual homes and risk the house actually getting destroyed and them all ended up dying or being washed away. Just a couple notes, if you're in the car and you're carrying your animals with you, keep in mind it's very easy to be overheated in something like this, especially out in the sun. So keep it away from direct sunlight if you can, if that means draping a blanket over it, or doing something to make sure that it's not getting direct sunlight from the windows. That's really ideal. If you need to stop the car to fill up on gas or something, or you're going in to eat, crack the windows and try to park in the shade. Just do everything to try to keep the temperature in the car from getting too high and too overheated. If your tub has an airtight seal, make sure that there are holes in the lid or holes in the side of the tub to keep ventilation going through there. The last thing I want to make a note of is if you're dealing with a really sensitive animal, not like a ball python, but something like a chameleon, something that's actually really sensitive to changes and to stress in particular, you might find it very beneficial to make the tub that you're using something that's not transparent to limit visual stimulation for the animal that's inside, so it's not seen as much. And if it's something like a chameleon specifically, give it something to climb on, something to grip, as opposed to just the bare paper towel. Just some branches and some leaves from an enclosure would just make the experience a whole lot nicer for something like a chameleon, which is really sensitive to stress levels and that sort of thing. So that's the Brian method. It's really going to cover most of the reptiles that you guys are going to be dealing with, whether it's a snake, a turtle, a lizard, or the variety of animals that you might work with will be able to be transported fairly easily and without much of an issue using this method. So there you have it. There's my recommendations on how to prep your reptiles if you have Hurricane Dorian coming and you might get some of the external ramifications, or if you live on the coast and you might actually need to evacuate. I know that I made this video pretty lighthearted, but evacuation and the hurricane in general is a pretty big event, so stay safe, and I hope you can use some of these tips to help keep your reptiles safe as well. I'm Ethan, and you've been watching Radiant Reptilia.